Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, looking out at the stars. The New Horizon was not a warship. It was a research vessel, built for exploring old ruins and studying ancient civilizations. Jake liked it that way. He had been flying through space for 15 years, and he had never fired a weapon at another living being. Dr. Lisa Adams walked up beside him, holding a datapad in her hands. She was the ship's scientist, an expert on alien cultures and their history. Lisa had studied the ruins of dozens of dead civilizations. She knew more about galactic history than most politicians. "Captain, we're getting close to the Kepler system," Lisa said. "The archaeological sites there should be fascinating. The reports say there are structures that are over 10,000 years old." Jake nodded. "Good. How long until we arrive?" "About 6 hours," replied Pete Collins from his station. Pete was their chief engineer, a man who could fix anything that broke on the ship. He had been working with machines since he was a child, and the New Horizon ran perfectly under his care. Amy Turner looked up from her communications console. "Captain, I'm picking up some chatter from the border worlds. There's talk about Zephyrian ships moving through the outer systems." Jake frowned. The Zephyrians were trouble. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. They were a warrior race that believed in conquest and domination. For the past 50 years, they had been expanding their territory, taking over smaller worlds and enslaving weaker species. But they had never touched human space. They had never attacked human ships or colonies. There was a good reason for that. 200 years ago, when humanity first joined the Galactic Council, they had signed the Universal Peace Accord. It was a treaty that brought peace to most of the galaxy. But there was one rule in that treaty that stood above all others: number. Species could attack humans without facing consequences from the entire galactic community. Jake remembered learning about this in school. His teacher had explained it simply. The other races agreed to protect us, and we agreed to protect them. But if anyone breaks that promise and attacks us, they face all of humanity together. The rule had worked. For 2 centuries, no major power had dared to attack human settlements directly. There had been small incidents, pirates and raiders, but nothing serious. Nothing that would wake up what humanity used to be. Jake pushed those thoughts away. His generation had grown up in peace. They were explorers, not warriors. They spent their time discovering new worlds and making friends with alien species. War was something from the history books. On the planet Kepler 438b, Governor Tom Bradley was having his morning coffee when his aide brought him the daily reports. New Haven Colony was doing well. The crops were growing, the children were healthy, and trade with nearby systems was profitable. Tom had been governor for 8 years. He had watched the colony grow from a small outpost to a thriving community of 50,000 people. There were farms, schools, hospitals, and even a small university. It was everything that human colonists dreamed of building. Bill Johnson was one of those colonists. He had arrived on New Haven 12 years ago with his wife Carol and their baby daughter Kate. Bill had always wanted to be a farmer, and New Haven offered him rich soil and plenty of space. His farm now produced enough food to feed hundreds of families, and he was proud of what he had built. Kate Johnson was now 14 years old. She had grown up on New Haven, and it was the only home she had ever known. She went to school with children from a dozen different worlds, all of them living together in peace. She was learning to speak 3 different alien languages, and she wanted to be a diplomat when she grew up. Carol Johnson worked at the colony's medical center. She was a doctor, and she treated humans and aliens alike. The colony welcomed anyone who came in peace, and Carol had learned to heal species she had never seen before. It was challenging work, but she loved it. None of them knew that danger was coming. Far away, in the heart of Zephyrian space, War Prime Kethver was studying star charts. He was the supreme military leader of his people, a position he had earned through decades of successful conquests. Under his leadership, the Zephyrian Empire had grown larger and stronger than ever before. But Kethver was not satisfied. There were still systems that his people did not control. There were still worlds that refused to bow to Zephyrian might. And the most frustrating of all were the humans. Humans had some of the richest worlds in the galaxy. They had advanced technology and prosperous colonies. But they were protected by that ancient treaty, the Universal Peace Accord. Any attack on humans would bring the wrath of the entire Galactic Council. Kethver believed that was all nonsense. He had studied human history, and what he saw were peaceful farmers and merchants. The humans had not fought a real war in 200 years. Their military was small and focused on exploration, not combat. They had grown soft during their long peace. The War Prime's advisors were not so sure. General Vexter, his most trusted commander, had reviewed the old records. Before the peace accord, humans had been different. They had been warriors, conquerors, survivors. They had fought wars that lasted for decades and won victories against impossible odds. War Prime, Vexter said carefully, perhaps we should be cautious. The humans may appear weak now, but their ancestors were formidable opponents. Kethver laughed. That was 200 years ago, General. Look at them now. They send archaeologists to explore dead worlds. They build farms and schools instead of fortresses and weapons factories. They have forgotten how to fight. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Kevin Brooks was reviewing the latest intelligence reports. As Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Force, it was his job to watch for threats to human space. The reports about Zephyrian military movements were concerning, but not unusual. The Zephyrians were always moving their fleets around, testing borders and intimidating smaller species. Admiral Brooks was a career military officer, but he had spent most of his time on peacekeeping missions and humanitarian aid. The Human Defense Force existed mainly to rescue colonists from natural disasters and to protect merchant ships from pirates. They had not prepared for real war in living memory. But Brooks remembered his training. Every human military officer learned about the old days before the peace accord. They studied the strategies and tactics that had made humanity feared throughout the galaxy. It was knowledge they hoped never to use, but they kept it alive just in case. At the Galactic Council headquarters, Ambassador Helen Parker was trying to build support for stronger economic sanctions against the Zephyrians. As humanity's chief representative to the Council, Helen had spent years building friendships with other species and promoting peaceful solutions to conflicts. The Council chambers were filled with representatives from hundreds of different worlds. Some looked like humans, others were so alien that they needed special equipment just to breathe the station's atmosphere. But they all had one thing in common. They wanted to avoid war. Helen knew that many council members were afraid of the Zephyrians. The warrior race had conquered dozens of worlds in the past century, and their military was powerful. But Helen also knew that they respected the peace accord. It had kept the galaxy stable for 2 centuries, and breaking it would be unthinkable. Or so she believed. In the depths of space, the New Horizon continued its journey toward Kepler 438b. Captain Morrison and his crew had no idea that they were sailing into the storm that would change everything. They were scientists and explorers, peaceful people, who had never imagined that they might soon witness the return of something the galaxy had hoped was gone forever. The old Wolf was still sleeping, but it would not sleep much longer. War Prime Kethver stood before the great holographic display in his command center. The 3-dimensional map showed dozens of star systems, with Zephyrian territory marked in red and human space in blue. For too long, those blue systems had been untouchable. General Vexter entered the room, his armor clanking with each step. War Prime, the fleet is ready. But I must ask again, are you certain about this course of action? Kethver turned to face his general. I am tired of tiptoeing around these humans, Vexter. For 2 centuries, we have avoided their space because of an old treaty. But look at them now. They send scientists to dig in the dirt of dead worlds. They have forgotten what it means to be warriors. The peace accord still stands, Vexter warned. If we attack humans, we risk war with the entire Galactic Council. Kethver laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber. The Council is weak. Half the species there are too frightened to fight us, and the other half depend on our trade routes. They will not risk everything for a few human farmers. The War Prime walked to another section of the display, where the Kepler system glowed. Softly, we will strike quickly and decisively. One small colony, far from their main worlds. We will claim it was a territorial dispute, but the humans fired first. By the time the Council can react, the matter will be settled. Vexter looked at the display with growing unease. New Haven Colony appeared as a small green dot on the screen. 50,000 humans lived there, most of them families with children. War Prime, these are civilians. This is not war, it is massacre. It is necessity, Kethver replied coldly. The humans must learn that their protection comes at a price. Once they understand we are serious, they will negotiate. They will give us what we want to avoid further conflict. 3 days later, the Zephyrian attack fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. 24 warships, led by General Vexter's flagship, moved toward the unsuspecting colony world. On New Haven, Governor Tom Bradley was reviewing agricultural reports when his communications officer burst into his office. Governor, we have Zephyrian ships approaching the system. They're not responding to our hails. Tom felt his blood turn. Cold. How many ships? 24 warships, sir. They'll be in weapons range in 2 hours. Tom immediately activated the colony's emergency protocols. Warning sirens began to wail across New Haven as families rushed to emergency shelters. The colony had defensive shields and a small security force, but they were no match for a full military fleet. Bill Johnson was working in his fields when he heard the sirens. He dropped his tools and ran toward his house, where Carol was already gathering emergency supplies. Kate was at school, and Bill's first thought was to reach his daughter. We need to get to Kate, Bill said as he burst through the door. Carol nodded, her face pale but determined. The school has shelters. She should be safe there. But as they stepped outside, they could see the Zephyrian ships in the sky, growing larger by the minute. The sleek predatory vessels looked like birds of prey descending on helpless ground animals. At the school, Kate Johnson huddled with her classmates in the underground shelter. Their teacher, Mrs. Roberts, tried to keep them calm, but everyone could hear the distant rumble of approaching ships. Some of the younger children were crying. Kate thought about her parents and wondered if she would ever see them again. She had learned about wars in her history classes, but she had never imagined that violence would come to her peaceful world. Governor Bradley sent out a desperate message to Earth and the Galactic Council. This is New Haven Colony under attack by Zephyrian forces. We are a civilian settlement with no military targets, requesting immediate assistance. The message was broadcast on all frequencies, but Bradley knew that help would not arrive in time. The nearest human military ships were days away, and the Galactic Council would need time to debate and discuss before taking any action. Captain Jake Morrison received the distress signal aboard the New Horizon. His ship was still 6 hours away from the Kepler system, but he could see the Zephyrian fleet on his long-range sensors. Can we help them? Dr. Lisa Adams asked, her voice tight with worry. Pete Collins shook his head grimly. We're a research ship, not a warship. We have no weapons that could harm those ships." Jake stared at the tactical display, feeling helpless. 24 Zephyrian warships against one unarmed research vessel. There was nothing he could do except watch and record what happened. The attack began at sunset on New Haven. The Zephyrian ships opened fire with plasma cannons, targeting the colony's defensive shields first. The energy barriers that protected the settlement flickered and died under the sustained bombardment. Then the ships turned their weapons on the colony itself. Bill and Carol Johnson were running toward the school when the first explosions lit up the sky. The ground shook beneath their feet, and buildings began to collapse around them. The Zephyrians were not trying to capture the colony. They were trying to destroy it. "Kate," Carol whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have to reach Kate." But as they rounded the corner toward the school district, a plasma bulb struck the building directly in front of them. The explosion threw them backward, and Bill felt something warm running down his face. When he wiped it away, his hand came back covered in blood. The school shelter where Kate was hiding shuddered under the impact of nearby explosions. The lights went out, and emergency power kicked in, casting everything in a dim red glow. Mrs. Roberts gathered the children closer together, whispering prayers that seemed inadequate against the violence above. Then the ceiling began to crack. General Vexter watched the bombardment from his flagship, his heart heavy with shame. This was not warfare. This was slaughter. The humans below had no way to fight back, no chance to defend themselves. They were dying because his war prime had decided to test humanity's resolve. "General," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving surrender signals from the colony." "Ignore them," came Kethver's voice over the comm system. "Continue the bombardment until nothing remains." Vexter closed his eyes. He was a soldier, bound by duty to obey his commander. But what they were doing here would stain his honor forever. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. When it finally ended, New Haven Colony was gone. The farms were burning craters, the schools were rubble, and the medical center where Carol Johnson had worked was nothing but twisted metal. Governor Tom Bradley died at his post, still trying to coordinate evacuation efforts when a plasma bolt struck the government building. Bill and Carol Johnson died together, crushed under debris as they tried to reach their daughter. Kate Johnson died with her classmates in the school shelter when the building collapsed. 50,000 human lives ended that day, killed not in battle, but in a deliberate act of genocide. Captain Morrison and his crew watched in horror as the Zephyrian fleet departed, leaving behind only smoke and ruins. The New Horizon was the first ship to reach the system after the attack, and what they found there would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "Dear God," Lisa Adams whispered as she looked at the images on the screen. "They killed everyone. Every single person." Jake Morrison stood silent for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists. Then he turned to Amy Turner at the communications station. "Send a message to Earth Command. Priority Alpha. Tell them that the peace accord has been broken. Tell them that New Haven is gone." As the message raced through hyperspace toward Earth, carrying news of the atrocity, something began to stir in the depths of human space. For 200 years, humanity had chosen the path of peace. They had built a civilization based on exploration, cooperation, and mutual respect. But they had never forgotten what they were capable of when pushed too far. The Zephyrians had just awakened something that had been sleeping for 2 centuries. Something that the galaxy had hoped would never wake up again. War Prime Kethvar had tested humanity's resolve. Soon, he would learn that some tests should never be conducted. The message from Captain Morrison reached Earth Command at 3 in the morning, local time. Admiral Kevin Brooks was awakened by his aide, Colonel Linda Shaw, who stood beside his bed with a grim expression on her face. "Admiral, you need to See this immediately, she said, handing him a secure datapad. She said, handing him a secure datapad. Brooks read the report in silence, his face growing darker with each line. When he finished, he set the pad down and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. 50,000 civilians, he said quietly, murdered in cold blood. Yes, sir. The Zephyrians made no attempt to capture the colony or take prisoners. It was pure destruction. Brooks stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the lights of Earth's capital city. Millions of people were sleeping peacefully, unaware that everything had just changed. Colonel, activate Protocol 7, Sende. Message to every human world, every ship, every military installation. Linda Shaw had been in the military for 20 years, but she had never heard those words spoken before. Protocol 7 was something from the old days, from before the peace accord. It was the signal that humanity was going to war. Sir, are you certain? Once we activate Protocol 7, there's no going back. Brooks turned to face her, and Shaw saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was cold and hard and absolutely certain. They killed our children, Colonel. They murdered families in their beds. Yes, I am certain. Within an hour, the coded message was racing through hyperspace to every corner of human space. It was short and simple. Protocol 7 is now active. All civilian vessels return to safe harbor. Military personnel report to stations. The old Wolf is waking up. On the battlecruiser Intrepid, Captain Sophie Davis received the message while on patrol near the Outer Rim. She had been born after the peace accord was signed, and she had never expected to see those words in her lifetime. Commander Alex Turner, her tactical officer, looked up from his station with confusion. Captain, what is Protocol 7? I've never heard of it. Sophie's face was pale as she turned to address her crew. Protocol 7 is the activation of our wartime protocols. Everything we've been trained for, but hope never to use. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. We are now at war. The crew of the Intrepid had served together for 5 years, conducting peacekeeping missions and rescue operations. They were good at their jobs, but they had never fired their weapons. In anger. Now they would learn what their ship was really built for. On Mars, General Ryan Foster stood in the control room of the planet's largest shipyard. For decades, these facilities had been used to build colony ships, research vessels, and cargo haulers. But buried deep in their computer systems were other blueprints, designs for ships that had not been built in 200 years. Chief Engineer Nancy Wright joined him at the main console. General, we've received the Protocol 7 activation. How do you want to proceed? Foster looked at the massive construction bays below them. Nancy, I want you to stop all civilian production immediately. Switch to the wartime protocols. I want destroyers, cruisers, and carriers. I want them built fast, and I want them built right. Nancy nodded grimly. How many ships are we talking about, sir? All of them. Every bay, every worker, every resource we have. The Zephyrians think we've forgotten how to build war machines. Let's remind them who we used to be. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, humanity's moon, other facilities were coming online. These were the secret installations that most people had forgotten existed. Weapons factories, training centers, and research labs that had been shuttered for 2 centuries were suddenly buzzing with activity. Major Chris Baker was one of the few people who had access to these facilities. As head of human intelligence, he had known this day might come eventually. He had hoped it never would, but he had prepared for it anyway. Sir, his assistant said as they walked through a corridor lined with sealed doors. The Psychological Warfare Division is requesting activation approval. Baker stopped walking. Psychological warfare was humanity's darkest specialty, the thing that had made other species afraid to fight them. Approved. Wake them all up. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Adams sat in the restricted section of the Galactic Archives, reading files that have been classified for 200 years. As a Zen archaeologist, she had always been curious about humanity's pre-Accord history. Now she was learning things that made her hands shake. The files told the story of what humans had been like before they chose peace. They were not just warriors. They were something worse. They were survivors who had crawled up from a death world and decided that nothing in the universe would ever threaten them again. She read about the Battle of Proxima, where human forces had held off an alien invasion fleet 10 times their size. She read about the siege of New Tokyo, where human defenders had fought for 3 years without surrender, eating rats and drinking rainwater rather than give up. Most disturbing of all, she read about humanity's reputation among other species before the peace accord. The other races had not agreed to protect humans out of kindness. They had done it out of fear. Fear of what humans became when they were threatened. One report from a captured alien commander summed it up. Humans do not fight wars to win territory or resources. They fight wars to make sure their enemies can never threaten them again. They are the only species we have encountered that practices warfare as total destruction. At the Galactic Council headquarters, Ambassador Helen Parker was trying to organize an emergency session, but the other species were reluctant to get involved. The Altarians claimed they needed more time to study the situation. The Centauri delegations said they had to consult with their home government. Only the vegans, humanity's oldest allies, offered immediate support. Ambassador Zara 7, their representative, met with Helen in private. Helen, my people remember what humans were like before the Accord. We helped convince you to choose peace because we feared what would happen if you chose war instead. Helen looked confused. What do you mean? Zara 7's large eyes were filled with ancient worry. Your species is unique, Helen. Most races fight until they achieve their objectives, then they stop. Humans fight until their enemies no longer exist. The Zephyrians have made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, the Zephyrians were celebrating their victory. War Prime Kethver held a grand ceremony on the capital world, declaring that humanity had been proven weak. The destruction of New Haven was being presented as a great military triumph. General Vexter did not attend the celebration. Instead, he was in his quarters studying intelligence reports about human military movements. What he was seeing made no sense. Human ships were moving in patterns that suggested massive mobilization, but they were not heading toward Zephyrian space. His aide, Commander Dekval, brought him the latest reports. General, human vessels are pulling back from all frontier positions. Their merchant ships are fleeing to protected systems. It's as if they're preparing for a siege. Vexter stared at the tactical display. No, Commander. They're not preparing for a siege. They're clearing the battlefield. I don't understand, sir. The old general sighed. I've studied human military history, Dekval. Before the peace accord, humans had a saying. When you wound the king, you must kill the king. They are not preparing to defend themselves. They are preparing to destroy us completely. On distant colony worlds, human families watched the news broadcasts with growing anger. The images from New Haven showed children's toys scattered among the rubble, family photos burned and torn, playgrounds turned into craters. These were not military targets. These were homes. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew had returned to Earth with their recordings of the New Haven massacre. The footage was shown to military leaders and government officials, but not to the public. It was too horrific, too enraging. If the citizens of Earth saw what had been done to their people, there would be riots in the streets. But the military leaders saw it. They saw the deliberate targeting of schools and hospitals. They saw the Zephyrian ships firing on evacuation centers. They saw the bodies of children who would never grow up. Admiral Brooks called a meeting of his senior staff. Gentlemen and ladies, we have not fought a real war in 2 centuries. Our enemies believe this makes us weak. They are about to learn otherwise. Colonel Shaw looked around the room at faces she had known for years. These were peacekeepers and explorers, people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. Now they would have to become something else. Admiral, what are our objectives? Brooks stood at the head of the table, his voice calm and certain. Complete destruction of Zephyrian military capacity. War crimes trials for their leadership. Reparations for the victims. And most importantly, a demonstration to the galaxy that the peace accord exists to protect them from us, not us from them. In the depths of human space, ancient machines were coming online. Weapons that had been stored for 2 centuries were being cleaned and loaded. Ships that had been mothballed were being refitted for war. Training programs that had existed only in computer simulations were being activated. The old wolf was waking up, and when it fully opened its eyes, the galaxy would remember why everyone had been so eager to keep it sleeping. The Zephyrians had broken the one rule that everyone feared would be broken. Soon they would understand why that fear had been justified. 6 months after the destruction of New Haven, the first Zephyrian patrol ship vanished without a trace. The vessel was called the Thunderstrike, and it had been patrolling the border between Zephyrian and neutral space. One moment it was sending routine reports to headquarters, and the next moment it was gone. No distress signal, no wreckage, nothing at all. Commander DeVale reported the loss to General Vexter. Sir, we've lost contact with the Thunderstrike. They were supposed to check in 2 hours ago. Vexter studied the star charts on his desk. Send another ship to investigate. It could be a technical failure. But 3 days later, the investigation ship also disappeared. Then another patrol vanished near the outer rim. Within 2 weeks, the Zephyrians had lost 8 ships along their border, and they had no idea what was happening to them. The truth was that Captain Sophie Davis and her Wolf pack were hunting. The human ships moved through space like ghosts, appearing from nowhere to strike and then vanishing before the Zephyrians could react. They used new technology that the galaxy had never seen before, stealth systems that made their ships invisible to most sensors. Commander, Alex Turner watched his targeting screen as another Zephyrian vessel came into range. Captain, we have the destroyer Red Claw on our scopes. She's alone and unsuspecting. Sophie nodded grimly. Lock weapons and fire. The Intrepid's plasma cannon spoke once, and the Red Claw exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, and then the human ships were gone, leaving nothing but debris floating in space. This was not the kind of warfare the galaxy was used to seeing. There were no grand fleet battles, no heroic last stands. The humans simply made Zephyrian ships disappear, one by one. With cold efficiency. Major Chris Baker's Psychological Warfare Division was also at work. They hacked into Zephyrian communication networks and began spreading carefully crafted messages. The first wave was simple: recordings of the New Haven massacre, broadcast to every Zephyrian world. The videos showed Zephyrian ships deliberately targeting human children and families. They showed the deliberate destruction of hospitals and schools. Most Zephyrian citizens had been told that New Haven was a military base that had fired first. Now they saw the truth. Riots broke out on 3 Zephyrian worlds as citizens demanded answers from their government. War Prime Kethver ordered the communications network shut down, but the damage was already done. His own people were beginning to question what they had done. The second wave of psychological warfare was more subtle. Human agents began spreading rumors about the fate of the missing patrol ships. They whispered that the humans had developed new weapons that could destroy entire fleets without leaving traces. They spoke of secret human technologies that could make ships vanish into other dimensions. None of these rumors were true. But fear spreads faster than facts. Zephyrian crews began to report strange sensor readings and phantom contacts. Perfectly good ships started developing mysterious technical problems when they approached human space. General Vexter was beginning to understand what the humans were doing. They're not trying to win territory, he told his staff during a strategy meeting. They're trying to break our will to fight. But War Prime Kethfer was not ready to admit his mistake. Send more ships to the border regions. Increase patrols. These human pirates cannot hide forever. The result was that the humans had more targets to hunt. Admiral Brooks watched the reports from his mobile command ship. The Retribution, his forces, had destroyed 47 Zephyrian vessels in 6 months without losing a single human ship. The enemy was beginning to pull back from their forward positions, but that only meant the humans would have to hunt them deeper in their own territory. Colonel Linda Shaw joined him on the bridge. Admiral, we're receiving reports that Zephyrian military leaders are requesting reinforcements from their home fleet. Good, Brooks replied. Let them bring everything they have. The more ships they send to us, the easier it will be to destroy them all at once. On the industrial world of Zephyr Prime, civilian workers were starting to panic. Human ships had been seen in the outer system, and everyone knew what that meant. The humans were coming for the heart of Zephyrian space, but instead of attacking the cities, the human fleet systematically destroyed every military installation in the system. Orbital weapons platforms, ship construction yards, military supply depots, all of them were turned into floating scrap metal in a matter of hours. The humans sent a message to the planet's surface. Your military assets have been neutralized. Your civilian population will not be harmed as long as you do not interfere with our operations. We are not like you. We do not make war on children. This was perhaps the most terrifying part of the human campaign. They could have destroyed the entire planet, killed millions of civilians in revenge for New Haven. Instead, they chose not to. They demonstrated that they were powerful enough to commit genocide, but disciplined enough to avoid it. General Ryan Foster's shipyards were now producing warships at an incredible rate. The massive construction facilities on Mars worked around the clock, turning out destroyers and cruisers with assembly line efficiency. Chief Engineer Nancy Wright had reorganized the entire production system to support the war effort. General, we're producing ships faster than we can crew them, Nancy reported during their weekly meeting. Foster smiled grimly. That's good, Nancy, because we're going to need every one of them. The human fleet was growing larger every day, but it was also growing more sophisticated. The new ships incorporated lessons learned from the ongoing campaign against the Zephyrians. They were faster, more heavily armed, and equipped with improved stealth technology. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian Empire was slowly collapsing from within. Their economy depended on trade routes that the humans had cut. Their military was demoralized by constant losses. Their government was facing rebellion from citizens who no longer believed in the war. War Prime Kethfer tried to rally his people with grand speeches about Zephyrian superiority and inevitable victory. But it was hard to claim victory when human ships were destroying military targets deep inside Zephyrian space with apparent ease. Commander Alex Turner had become something of a legend among human crews. His tactical abilities allowed the Wolf Pax to strike with perfect precision, hitting exactly the right targets at exactly the right time. The Zephyrians had started calling him the Ghost because his ships seemed to appear and disappear at will. But Turner took no pleasure in his success. Every Zephyrian ship he destroyed was crewed by living beings, soldiers who were following orders just as he was. The difference was that his orders came from a legitimate desire for justice, while theirs came from a madman's ambition. Dr. Lisa Adams had left her research to join the war effort as an intelligence analyst. Her knowledge of alien psychology helped, Human commanders predict how the Zephyrians would react to different types of pressure. She had become part of something she had never wanted to be, a machine designed to destroy an entire civilization. The Galactic Council was watching the conflict with growing alarm. What they saw was not a war between equals, but a systematic dismantling of a major galactic power by an opponent they had underestimated. Ambassador Helen Parker addressed the council. One final time, the Zephyrian Empire chose to break the peace accord. They chose to murder 50,000 innocent civilians. Now, they are learning the consequences of that choice. The Altaran representative tried to speak. Ambassador Parker, surely there must be room for negotiation. This level of destruction serves no one. Helen's response was cold and final. The time for negotiation ended when Zephyrian ships opened fire on human children. There will be no peace until the Zephyrian military capacity is completely destroyed and their war criminals are brought to justice. On his flagship, General, Vexter received reports of another devastating defeat. The humans had destroyed an entire supply convoy, including its escort of 12 warships. His forces were being systematically eliminated, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to stop it. His aide brought him a personal message from War Prime Kethfor, ordering him to launch a counterattack against human space. Vexter read the message and then quietly deleted it. Instead, he composed a different message, one that would be sent on an encrypted channel to Admiral Brooks. It was a simple request. I wish to discuss terms for the surrender of Zephyrian forces. The war must end before my people are completely destroyed. But before he could send the message, alarms began blaring throughout his ship. Human vessels had appeared on the edge of the system, and they were heading straight for the Zephyrian home fleet. The final battle was about to begin, and Vexter knew that his forces had no chance of victory. The humans had spent 6 months proving that they were not the peaceful explorers the galaxy thought they were. They were something much more dangerous. Warriors who had chosen peace, but had never forgotten how to wage war as the human fleet approached. Their formation was perfect, their movement precise. They looked like predators who had finally cornered their prey after a long hunt. The old wolf was fully awake now, and it was very, very hungry. The final battle never came. General Vexter stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human fleet approach through the darkness of space. 300 human warships moved in perfect formation toward the Zephyrian home world. Behind them, the planet's orbital defenses prepared for a fight they could not win. War Prime Kethfor's voice crackled over the communication system. All ships, prepare for battle. We will show these humans what Zephyrian cards looks like. But Vexter had seen enough death. He had watched his empire crumble over the past 6 months. He had lost thousands of good soldiers to an enemy that struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. The war was already over. All that remained was to decide how many more would die. The general walked to his communication station and opened a channel to the human fleet. This is General Vexter of the Zephyrian Defense Force. I request permission to speak with Admiral Brooks. A few minutes later, Admiral Kevin Brooks appeared on the screen. The human commander looked tired, as if the weight of command had aged him years in the past months. But his eyes were steady and cold. General Vexter, I'm listening. Admiral, I wish to surrender my forces. The war is over. My people have suffered enough. From somewhere in the background, Kethfor's voice shouted angrily. Vexter, you? Coward. I forbid this surrender. The general looked directly at Admiral Brooks. War Prime Kethfor no longer speaks for the Zephyrian military. I am assuming command of all forces, and I formally surrender to the human fleet. Brooks nodded slowly. What are your terms, General? No terms, Admiral. Unconditional surrender. Our weapons will be powered down, our shields lowered. We ask only that you treat our wounded with dignity and that civilian populations be spared." The human admiral studied Vexter for a long moment. "General, you understand that there will be war crimes trials. Those responsible for the New Haven massacre will face justice." "I understand, Admiral, and I accept full responsibility for my part in those crimes." Within an hour, the Zephyrian home fleet had surrendered. Over 200 warships powered down their weapons and lowered their shields. The orbital defense platforms went silent. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been defeated without firing a shot in the final engagement. Admiral Brooks transported to Vexter's flagship to accept the surrender in person. The two commanders met in the Zephyrian's ready room, surrounded by the symbols of an empire that no longer existed. "General, I want you to know that I take no pleasure in this victory," Brooks said as he accepted Vexter's ceremonial sword. "Your people chose this path when they attacked innocent civilians." Vexter nodded sadly. "I know, Admiral. I tried to warn War Prime Kethver that attacking humans would lead to disaster, but he believed your people had grown weak during the long peace. We had grown peaceful, General. There's a difference." Captain Jake Morrison was among the first humans to land on the Zephyrian homeworld. His ship, the New Horizon, now carried a full team of investigators and medical personnel. They had come to document the aftermath of the war and to begin the long process of rebuilding. Dr. Lisa Adams walked through the capital city with a mixture of sadness and amazement. The Zephyrians had built a beautiful civilization with tall spires and flowing gardens. And now their streets were empty, their people hiding in their homes, afraid of what the conquering humans might do to them. "It's strange," Lisa said to Jake as they examined the damaged monument. "They're afraid we'll treat them the way they treated our people." Jake looked at the monument, which showed Zephyrian warriors in heroic poses. Maybe that fear will teach them something about the value of mercy. The trials began 6 months later on a neutral world under Galactic Council supervision. War Prime Kethver and his top commanders were charged with crimes against humanity. The evidence was overwhelming. Videos from New Haven showed the deliberate targeting of civilians. Communication intercepts proved that the attack had been planned in advance. Kethver showed no remorse during his trial. "I did what was necessary for my people," he declared. "The humans were weak, and weakness invites attack." But General Vexter's testimony painted a different picture. He described how he had warned against the attack, how he had tried to minimize civilian casualties, and how he had ultimately surrendered to prevent further bloodshed. "I am guilty of following illegal orders," Vexter said in his final statement. "But I want the galaxy to understand that not all Zephyrians supported this madness. Many of us knew it was wrong from the beginning." The trials lasted for 2 years. Kethver and 12 of his top commanders were sentenced to life imprisonment. Vexter received a lighter sentence of 10 years, in recognition of his attempts to limit the damage and his eventual surrender. But the real punishment for the Zephyrian Empire was not the trials. It was the complete dismantling of their military capacity. Their warships were scrapped or converted to civilian use. Their weapons factories were shut down. Their military academies were closed. The Zephyrian people were allowed to keep their government and their culture, but they would never again be a military threat to anyone. The peace treaty included provisions for monitoring that would last for generations. Meanwhile, humanity began the process of rebuilding New Haven. Captain Morrison had volunteered to oversee the project, and he approached it with the same careful attention he had once given to archaeological sites. The new colony was built on the same site as the old one, but it was designed to be a memorial as well as a home. At the center of the settlement stood a monument listing the names of all 50,000 victims of the massacre, including Bill, Carol, and Kate Johnson. Amy Turner, now promoted to commander, helped establish the colony's new communication systems. "Captain," Do you think the people who come here will remember what happened? Morrison looked at the monument where fresh flowers had been placed by the first new settlers. They'll remember, Amy, and they'll make sure their children remember. 2. The Galactic Council reconvened with a very different atmosphere than before. The member species who had remained silent during humanity's pleas for justice now competed to offer their support and friendship. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically. Ambassador Helen Parker presented humanity's new requirements for galactic peace. The Universal Peace Accord was expanded to include stronger protections for all civilian populations. War crimes would be prosecuted by an international court with real enforcement power, and any species that committed genocide would face the same fate as the Zephyrians. The galaxy has learned an important lesson, Helen told the assembly. Peace is not maintained by the weak. It is maintained by the strong who choose restraint. But when that restraint is broken by the actions of others, the consequences will be swift and complete. On Earth, Admiral Brooks oversaw the partial demobilization of humanity's war machine. Most of the activated shipyards returned to civilian production. The Psychological Warfare Division was disbanded. The secret weapons programs were shut down. But not everything went back to the way it was before. Some facilities remained active, some ships stayed in service, some weapons stayed ready. The galaxy had been reminded of what humans were capable of, and humanity intended to keep that reminder alive. Dr. Lisa Adams returned to her archaeological research, but she also began writing a comprehensive history of the war. She wanted future generations to understand both the horror of what the Zephyrians had done and the necessity of humanity's response. We didn't want to become warriors again, she wrote in her conclusion. But when evil forces massacre innocents, good people must be willing to fight. The price of peace is eternal vigilance, and sometimes that vigilance requires terrible action. Captain Sophie Davis and Commander Alex Turner continued to serve in the Human Defense Force, but their Volpac tactics were now studied by military academies throughout human space. They had proven that a small, well-trained force could defeat a much larger enemy through superior strategy and technology. On the rebuilt New Haven, children like Emma Roberts and Paul Mitchell grew up hearing stories of the war from the survivors. They learned that freedom was not free, that peace required strength, and that good people must sometimes do terrible things to protect the innocent. The galaxy settled into a new era of peace, but it was a different kind of peace than before. It was not based on treaties and good intentions alone. It was based on the knowledge that somewhere in human space, the old wolf was sleeping lightly, ready to wake at the first sign of danger. General Vexter, serving his sentence on a prison world, received a letter from Admiral Brooks near the end of his term. General, it read, I hope your people have learned from this tragedy. Humanity offers friendship to all who come in peace. But we will never again allow innocents to be murdered while we stand by and do nothing. The galaxy had learned why there was one rule everyone feared to break. And in the quiet halls of power on 1,000 worlds, leaders looked at the stars and remembered the price of provoking the humans. Some lessons, as humanity had proven, can only be taught in blood.